Today, we're going to have a panel discussion on trends and opportunities in the Rwanda tech ecosystem. And we have three panelists. We have Philip Gasaatura, Project Director at Kigali Innovation City. We have Joanna Nicholas, Country Director at East Africa Investments. And Abhinav Gautam, an entrepreneur who's founder and CEO of FreshBox. To keep in line with the theme of today, I will give our panelists 30 seconds to pitch who they are, beyond the titles that I just mentioned. We can go ahead and start with you, Philip.
Hi, thanks for having me, and hi to everyone on the event. My name is Philip. I'm been previously in my previous life, I was an investment banker in trading and technology, so really passionate about technology. And more recently, in the last 10 years, have been involved in entrepreneurship, running several businesses here in Uganda, in Nairobi. And so very excited to see some of the ideas that are coming through. And thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Abhinav, you can go to next.
Hey everybody, I'm Abhinav Gautam, CEO and co-founder of FreshBox Rwanda. We're working on ag tech and agro-logistics platform to reduce post-harvest losses in Rwanda. We were actually the winners of last year's AfricArena. Sorry, I wish we were in person today to crown the next winner. But on the side, I'm very excited to be here. And I also work on building some of the ecosystem for startups here in Rwanda, and currently the chapter director for Startup Grind.
Thank you. Over to you, Joanna.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joanna Nicholas. I'm British, as you can probably hear, but I've been in Rwanda now for 10 years. As well as being the country director of East Africa Investments, I also am currently working with a brand new business institute called Imanzi Business Institute, which is part of the Private Sector Federation. And we are also working quite closely with Abhinav and other people in the startup ecosystem to try. I'm quite keen to make a better bridge between SMEs and the startup ecosystem. And I also ran a small business in Rwanda for 4 years. So I experienced much of the pain that many of the entrepreneurs feel. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Before we dive into the discussion, just to let everyone know that you can go ahead and post your questions during the discussion. And then with time permitting, we're going to try to address most of them. Panelists, this question is simple that I'm going to give to you. What are the trends and opportunities you see in the tech ecosystem during these uncertain times? We know COVID has rocked really the whole world. What are the trends and opportunities you see in the ecosystem now? We'll start with you, Philip.
Imanzi, this was a great opportunity to say ladies first. You missed it.
I have a time machine. I have a time machine button, so I'm going to click it, and then over to you, Joanna.
Okay, I don't mind. A bit of old-fashioned sexism is fine. So some of the trends that I've been seeing, I've been involved in quite a few Zoom calls with all sorts of people in Kigali. As an investor, I'm getting lots of ideas pitched to me in the health sector, and also in terms of people coming up with money apps to help move money around, whether that's making payments using mobile money and things like that. I think a trend, I'm going to say, but possibly a challenge as an investor that I'm seeing is that lots of the ideas that I've seen in the health sector, for example, or education, they are really the kind of businesses that I believe should be chasing after grant money at this stage, not investor money, because they tend to be ideas that may eventually generate some kind of profit, but possibly 3, 4 years, 5 years down the line. So there are lots of very, very good ideas, but probably not ideal for investors right now. And then I think the second thing with many of the money platforms, it's fantastic that lots of people want to get into this space. But I would advise those people, the entrepreneurs who are focused on these kind of platforms, to really do quite a lot of research into understanding banking risk, for example, and the legal aspects, the licensing aspects of moving money around between people, because you can go quite a long way down the line before you realize that your product can't really operate in Rwanda, or it's just not allowed by the understandable banking laws which control risk and help protect people's money. So I think those are two of the trends that I've seen specifically in Rwanda. More globally, I had a chat with my colleagues who are based in all sorts of different countries, and one of my colleagues reflected that there is definitely money for investment at the moment. So it's not that people have run out of money. There's plenty of money around. And one of my colleagues in particular compared it to the dot-com crash, where there were all sorts of tech companies, but who didn't really have a sound business model for creating value for an investor. Whereas now there are some good business models we're seeing that should merit investment. That said, the downside is that investors are being a little bit more careful. So they're asking a lot more proof to make sure that this product really can generate within revenue within a relatively short space of time. So I think that those are the global trends that we saw.
Joanna, maybe can you touch a little bit more on the difference between grant money and investor money for all the entrepreneurs in the audience?
Yeah, sure. So all that I mean is that if you're doing, for example, a health app, are you sure that someone is going to pay for it? Because in a country like Rwanda, where the vast majority of de santé, which is a fantastic thing, but that means that it's the insurance companies that are paying for any healthcare. So who are the people who are actually going to pay for your product? And therefore, if you have a product that is not going to be generating profits very, very quickly, then how does an investor make money? And in a grant scenario, there are all sorts of people who have money to give away. And as an entrepreneur, you receive that money and you don't have to give it back. So it can be great in some business areas to start with grants to get you going until you've reached the maturity level where you do have paying customers. And then it's the right time to approach an investor because you're making a profit, and that investor can consider how they will get their money back after 3 or 4 years.
Thank you, Joanna. I hope the entrepreneurs who did not know the difference are taking notes in the audience. And I'll forward the question to you, Philip. What sort of trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Joanna. A lot of what you see happening is much of it in the health space. But I'll point to during the COVID period here in Rwanda, where you saw about a 6x deposit ratio in banking for the telcos that all of a sudden jumped overnight. So everyone had been pushing the whole cashless, and then it took one wave, and all of a sudden we were all going that way. Now, of course, it started to creep down with the introduction of the fees, but I think there is still an opportunity. One, for businesses, they saw the ability to then serve their customers without having to come into their stores. And particularly, I'm looking at your SME level. For instance, your corner shop in downtown. How can I serve them? How am I able to digitize quickly, to be able to be online, to be able to take payments online? I think one of the critical things in the payment space in Africa that I've seen over the years is there's a trust issue. If I make a payment online, how am I sure that I'm going to actually get it? And that's why cash has still been king. But with this, there has been the shift, say, okay, I'm happy to try small transactions to sort of ramp that up quickly. So customers are no longer having to walk into store. And so there is an opportunity for tech companies just to be able to provide what do online systems for people look like, what do their accounting systems look like, how do they integrate all that, how they take payments, and integrating into the backend for the banks. That to me is something I see. But to add on as well, I think while there is a lot of money chasing good ideas, I think for a business, I learned, having burned my hands a while back, is first of all, there needs to be, is there a desirability for what you're doing? Is there a market? Then secondly is, can you make money? Then third is, can you do it? Because most of the times when you get into really high-end tech, you're not necessarily, who can you partner with to actually deliver on that kind of product? So to me, I think I'll stop there and just say there is that place for the SMEs to be onboarded. And I think today, moving a lot of them from cash into the digital space is quite an exciting opportunity. I think a year or two ago, one of the banks here ran a sort of campaign around cashless, but at the end of every month, you still see long lines of people wanting to deposit or get out cash. So that said, COVID does present that opportunity to digitize a lot of the SMEs who make up the biggest segment of our economy. Thanks.
As a little bit of a follow-up, Philip, when we talk about cashless payments and digital payments, yes, the government is all behind it. Banks have been saying this for years and years. And when we talk about cashless payments, you immediately think about mobile money, all these cashless transactions that already exist. But do you think there is room in the country, especially from the policy-making side, for new startups to, I don't know, create something new that's not on the market yet? Do you think there's a little bit of room for that?
I think there's room for anything. I mean, if there was no room for that, we'd never have had M-Pesa come along. But to Joanna's point, there needs to be working with the regulators, because you don't want to go halfway or 60% way and figure out that way the regulator is going to knock this down. It is working with the regulators. They are a friend, they can be an ally, but you need to start that journey early on to actually figure out what doesn't work. And I think also there is room for a lot of the entrepreneurs who may not have a background in the financial, within FIs or whether insurance or banking, to actually have on board people from, say, for instance, credit, loan application, to your transaction advisors, all these who actually understand what goes on inside a bank, but also know what the regulator is requiring. So I think there is that space.
Thank you. I will go over to you, Abhinav. Some of the things that have already been mentioned is innovations in the health sector, trends in the health sector, and then as well mobile money payments and cashless transactions. If you could go ahead, Abhinav, what sort of trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I think definitely in health and agro-tech more than ever now. Suddenly, people, governments, partners, and even consumers are realizing that, hey, we needed these companies. I think underlying over, especially here in Rwanda and more in the continent, I think logistics, the back end, whether we talked greatly about finance, so that's cashless or digital payments, that's definitely important catalyst, but even logistics, just looking at some of the investments that were made in the past 3 months across the continent, most have been in logistics. So I think that's a trend to focus on, whether it's tech related or how we can improve that, especially in these times when you have difficulties with imports or exports or border closures. More than the local infrastructure for logistics is very important. I think from the entrepreneur side, I think not a trend, but what we should be necessarily aware of is building businesses that are actually businesses where we are getting paid to give a product or give a service. That we have to be more aware of that as entrepreneurs. And as Joanna said, I don't think it's an investment, it's an issue. As long as we're building businesses and we're also building platforms or have a team that can pivot or adjust. Doesn't necessarily mean you lose your core businesses, but it's been interesting to see across, even in Rwanda and Africa, to just see some businesses who were doing food delivery for months, they were doing ride sharing and then suddenly got into a food delivery businesses. So we have to look into trends of like how fast you can be adaptable for the whatever issue.
Thank you, Abhinav. Since you just mentioned it, could you maybe share a little bit about how, because we know you run FreshBox, could you share a little bit what FreshBox is, and maybe how have you had to change and adapt
so definitely
your business during this time?
Earlier this year and even during these times, we were definitely hit by the original business model we were aiming for. We were running on the model of doing cold chain as a service. That model, through many different ways and research and just at times, we found out that it's really not today in 2020, not really a sustainable model in Rwanda, at least. So even ourselves have been focusing more on just understanding more of the value chains in agriculture in Rwanda, as well as the logistics space, and seeing how we can use cold chain as a platform or as a part of a larger system. So, even for FreshBox, we have faced the same challenges, and especially coming as a younger company where you may not be running a sustainable big businesses from the start. We were definitely had hurdles adapting to that fast, but now we're looking on a larger strategy and how to actually create services around than what we were originally planning beginning of this year.
Thank you, Abhinav. To change the question a little bit, but still in line, Joanna, could you tell us maybe a little bit how, because we know you are an investor and you also East African Investments makes a lot of investments. Could you talk a little bit about how COVID-19 is reshaping the way you approach investments? If you're already thinking about that.
Yeah, to be honest, not a huge change in the way that we're going about things. So obviously all the same practical things that everyone else has experienced, where I'm trying to meet young businesses online instead of meeting them face to face. I think there might be some influence in terms of the way that we screen a business, because if it's harder for us to come and visit, for example, a warehouse or see real customers in action, then we have to trust a little bit more the data that we're being given by the entrepreneur and trust our own market research in judging whether or not we think a business is a viable business. I think one thing that we're seeing, perhaps less as an investor, but practically something that's been fantastic, is helping entrepreneurs to get up and running faster. So Rwanda is famous for starting a business by lunchtime. You go into RDB in the morning and by 12 o'clock, you already have your company number. But what I've really enjoyed over the last couple of months is some of the other key people also adapting the way that they work. So banks, bizarrely, finally accepting digital letters instead of insisting that you go into a bank in person with a letter that has been stamped with an old-fashioned ink stamp. I think adaptations like that are really going to help businesses get up and running and starting to generate revenue much faster than they would have done in the past. So I see lots of opportunities for entrepreneurs to change the way that they're doing things, just in those small ways. Otherwise, I think for us, it's kind of business as usual, just perhaps we're getting more tech applicants than we have done in the past. So fewer agriculture businesses, fewer other service businesses, and more technology businesses, which is good because they're the ones that more obviously have the potential to scale, and that's what we're looking for in the long term.
Are you looking to? I don't know what the criteria you look at are, but are you looking at incorporating a digital component as a very big criterion in the investments that you make?
So perhaps just to explain a little bit about East Africa Investments, we've been operating in Rwanda for the last 3 years. We've made 6 investments to date, and we've already exited from 1 investment, which is a good thing, meaning the entrepreneur was able to generate enough profits to repay the debt. That was a debt investment. I've forgotten your question temporarily. Sorry. What did you say, Kev?
Are you going to be looking at the investments that you make? Are you going to be looking at entrepreneurs that have a digital component in their solution as something strong because of the uncertain times?
So we're actually interested in all sorts of businesses. So any sector. I think the reason why technology and having a digital component as part of a business is interesting is because one is in Rwanda that every single business seems to come up against is that there are 13 million people in Rwanda, of which a significant majority are fairly poor people with very little disposable cash. So whenever you're trying to estimate a market size, Rwanda is often very difficult. And therefore, if we meet an entrepreneur with a business idea that might seem interesting for Rwanda, but possibly won't generate enough of a profit in Rwanda, then it needs to be a business that they can very quickly transpose into another market. whether it's a neighboring market like DRC or Kenya, or whether it's something global where the customer can be based anywhere. I think that gives us comfort that there's really significant potential for growth in the longer term. And that's why, you know, for obvious reasons, technology suggests that that's possible.
Yes, thank you, Joanna. To Philip, can you share a little bit how the government is rethinking the support or changing their priorities in terms of the way they support the tech ecosystem, given the uncertain times the COVID brings us?
Super, thanks. I think there are a number of areas, and I think through KIC and another number of other areas, there's particularly around the talent. How do we help and foster the talent? Because that's for every startup that's coming in, is where do I get access to the talent? Where do I get access to the resources? So it's the partnerships that it's looking at creating both internally and externally to provide that leverage. One other is also on the funding side. So part of what the government is looking at is how do we create the spur and create the VC market that can start to invest private sector capital into this space here, as well as some of those around the startup. What does it look like? And I think there's work around some of the legislation that would help make it easier for startups to register here from within Rwanda, from outside Rwanda, to come kickstart here, find the financing, and help them with that kind of growth that is needed to spur. And to add on to Joanna's point is how do you get them to scale? Because one of the things that is well known is, while Rwanda is a very small country, 30 million people, it does love to look at how do I punch above our weight. And so how do we look at getting some of these businesses to scale beyond? So Rwanda is a test market, setting up as a proof of concept base to then allow some of the businesses to come here and scale beyond Rwanda.
Nice, thank you. We have a question. I think this goes to Joanna from the chat. How tough is it to raise investment funds here in Rwanda? And maybe to add a little bit to that, could you maybe talk specifically how tough it is in the tech space, if you have a tech solution?
Are you interpreting the question as being how difficult is it for an entrepreneur to get investments? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, like I said, I mean, we have a pot of money ready to spend over the next 18 months to 2 years. So we try to be a very positive investor, and we do focus on impact. So we're looking for businesses that will generate the maximum impact in Rwanda, be it by creating jobs or by paying taxes or by employing, youth and women, for example. So in a Western model, our business model would not be sustainable, because the cost of each transaction, the time that we spend looking for businesses, we actually work with the businesses often to help them improve their business model, improve their pitch deck before we are ready to make an investment in them. So that transaction cost in a European model, for example, would be far too high when you then look at the money that we invest. So having said all of that, we provide a lot of support, and the money is there to be spent. But I'll be honest, we are struggling to find good businesses to invest in. And I think it's worth me mentioning that there's 2 key things that we're looking for. One, we've already spoken about, which is someone who's got a really good business model that has lots of potential to grow and expand, generate revenue, and then ultimately generate profits. But of course, the second aspect is, in some ways, investing can actually become quite a personal activity, where you might meet an entrepreneur who has a fantastic business plan, who has all of the paperwork ready, but ultimately there's something about trust, personal trust, because we are representing a bunch of individuals who've put their money into a pot, and we feel a moral obligation to those individuals to spend their money wisely. And therefore, we also need to feel that we trust the entrepreneur, that they're being transparent with us, and that they are committed to what they're doing. And it can be quite hard to find that magic combination of both a good business model and a really good, solid entrepreneur who's really committed. So finding those things together, it can be quite tricky.
As a follow-up, does East Africa Investment work hand in hand, or do they try to work with, because for instance, when you look at the Rwanda tech ecosystem, there's not a lot, but there's a couple of support providers, the people that have, I don't know, accelerators, incubators, and different people that are trying to offer support services to entrepreneurs, whether it is to help them prototype, whether it is to make them investment ready. Do you work with those support providers so that they can create a sort of pipeline so that you have access to people that already have what you may be looking for?
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned when I was introducing myself at the beginning, I feel really passionate actually about developing this ecosystem in Kigali, which is why I enjoy working with Abhinav, who's one of the panelists. Also, I noticed on the chat that David Ross is on the call. He's a private investor and he's a teacher at Carnegie Mellon University. I used to work in the same office building as Inkomoko, which is one of the biggest accelerators we have here in Kigali. And about once every 2 months, I will sit down with one of the lead people at Inkomoko and go through all of the new businesses that they're working with to make sure that anything that they feel has potential for investment, they make an introduction and I meet those people. Then there's also, I know the people at Bid Network, for example, who are supported by US aid at the moment, whose job it is to coach businesses as much as possible so that they're ready for investment. So hopefully I'm fairly well integrated into the ecosystem to try to meet as many investor-ready businesses as possible. But I know those of us on the call who are in Kigali will all agree that the ecosystem still needs to mature quite significantly so that we get more businesses coming through, have more investor-ready businesses. There's still an awful lot of work to do, but it's exciting to be part of it.
Definitely, it's very exciting. Does any of the panelists want to add anything before we wrap it up?
No, I agree. There's a good question. I think one of the questions I want to touch on is somebody asked, Papa asked, how can incubators and accelerators in Rwanda or Africa better assist entrepreneurs during this time? I think my view as definitely as an entrepreneur is that there has been, it's great because like a lot of these accelerators and incubators and programs that are meant to help SMEs and startups, they more than ever got so much information that they could share on Zoom calls. You could have a weekly call, and everybody's doing that here in Rwanda and across Africa. There's dozens of Zoom calls if you want to sign up. I think still the bigger problem in my views in my opinion, is that sometimes a lot of this is just one-way information that is being shared, which is not bad because often we are, Rwanda, especially in the sense there's a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, and we are getting information that we have never been heard of or had access to. But I think one of our ecosystems, or in general ecosystems, can develop better is having a two-way relationship where they can work with that entrepreneur on a personal level, whether that's a mentor or mentee program or something that takes the challenges that that actual entrepreneur is facing and how the ecosystem can come in and help specialized on those specific challenges. So there's more for us to listen back from what the entrepreneurs are actually wanting rather than just providing. And Joanna kind of mentioned it before as well, that one of the work she's doing is trying to see how we can, at least in Kigali, have all these hubs and consistently repeat things because that may not be the most productive way to move and get our entrepreneurs moving.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Abhinav. I think information sharing is very crucial, especially among the service providers, because there's a need to, in a way, map out what each player is providing and make sure like whatever you specialize in, nobody else is replicating, and share information because it's for the betterment of the entrepreneurs. We're out of time. We'll go ahead and pass it on to the pitching part of this of today. Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you so much, Abhinav. And thank you everybody who has been who has lent a listening ear to this part of the discussion.